All right, so we're gonna do some more volume stuff, and we're gonna talk about pyramids and cones this time. So for Act 1 here, I'm just gonna give you some notes.
We
For-
get rain, baby. Really useless.
You say baby? We get rain, baby?
Maybe. Oh, he's a real weatherman then, if you can't tell for sure.
Oh, they get ice in Minnesota.
Ice?
It is February.
It's gonna be raining ice? Apparently.
Oh, I feel bad for my
Anna.
mom.
We passed the weather stage, Landon. You ready to go?
Put your phone away, please.
Because I have this big weather app on my phone that my dad made me get. So every time I drive my moped, I don't have to go through rain. Which that already happened. I was drenched.
Nice to know.
All right. So pyramids and cubes, we're gonna have both have a square base.
Can you zoom in?
Yep. Both have a square base. And how many bases would a pyramid have?
One,
How many does a cube have?
4. Wait, what?
Bases, not faces.
6.
That's sides. How many how many bases does a cube have?
A cube has 1, 2,
Here's a base.
3,
Here's a base.
4.
2 bases. Everything else is faces. All right.
Unless you
Eight.
tip it over.
And they'd still be bases. They'd just be laying on its side.
But,
All right. So a pyramid.
so is my head a base?
No, your face is a face. Yeah.
I said my head, not face.
Pyramid has 1 base. Cube has 2.
Ouch.
Why is it always clear that I can think about everything?
I think that's you.
And Shakira's just clumsy.
All right. So if we had to guess,
Like Kira, wheelchair, her legs can't.
if we had to guess, we're gonna say estimate. If we had this prism down here, it had the same base. These two shapes have the same base and they're the same height. How many of these pyramids, imagine if they're filled with water, how many of these pyramids would you have to dump into this cube to fill it all the way up?
One.
That depends. Because
Why?
can't you have 2 pyramids that equal 1 square?
So how many, so imagine we fill this pyramid up with water, right?
But you can't.
Just imagine. Use your imagination.
I can't, because my imagination was like, it's impossible. It would dump out
All
everywhere.
right.
But
Then imagine this is a box, and how many of these would we have to dump in
then
there
the
filled with
will
water?
Go to the box. If it's cardboard,
It's a plastic box. Plastic holds water. How about that? Can you imagine now?
drop it.
Or it's maybe it's
metal
titanium. That holds water.
But the Titanic got hit by an iceberg, then it broke.
And it held water
You see
too.
an iceberg everywhere. Yeah.
All right. So how many of these do you think, if we filled it with water,
I say 3.
3? 3 is a good guess.
I say two.
Say about 3 pyramids, square pyramids, because the base is a square.
What the heck is that?
People jamming out. I think.
That's some old music.
I mean,
Huh? No, we didn't even watch the video. You're just reading to contest because GRA.
what's the rest of the words?
All right. So about 3 square pyramids filled with water would have to be poured into a cube to fill it up.
Can we watch The Simpsons?
Nope.
You know what? Maybe we should just shut her down.
Yeah, that's actually a great point.
We have hot chocolate tomorrow. It's supposed to snow. Can we?
If you can make it a whole day without complaining,
Ooh.
Too late.
like tomorrow,
Okay?
we'll have hot chocolate Wednesday.
Yeah.
All right. Has everybody got this down? Has everybody got part 2 down?
Yeah.
All right. So then for our calculation, we're going to say 3 pyramids can fit into a prism where the water represents volume?
Why does your word go so crooked?
That's a good question. Maybe I need a little straight edge.
It's like, zoom,
What was that like?
zoom.
Okay. Just had to make sure I had that one right.
It's still going sideways.
Oh, maybe I'm gonna make it sideways now just to bug you.
I heard a loud bird this morning in science.
So did I.
Something's in my eye.
It was a mosquito everybody was hearing.
Probably a bat.
Yeah, 'cause bats sound
We gotta get the tetanus shot.
That one.
because bats sound like this.
All right, so 3 pyramids can fit into a prism, and the volume is represented by the water we were just talking about there. So if we're gonna fill up those pyramids and pour them into that prism, the water inside those shapes would be our volume. All right, so now it says, based on this activity, what can we say about the volume of a pyramid compared to the volume of a prism with the
They're
same
both
base?
big.
What's the last word?
Water. Now we're going to say the volume of a pyramid is 1/3 the volume of a prism with the same base. So the volume of a pyramid is 1/3 the volume of a prism with the same base.
See how good my handwriting is with all the camera paper. What even is that?
What's the last line? It's boys.
The same base.
What's the second line?
The volume of a prism with the same base.
Okay.
So the volume of a pyramid is 1/3 the volume of a prism with the same base. All right, how do we find the volume of a rectangular prism?
Base 10 height.
All right, it is base times height,
Why do you have a Bismarck section on?
because I'm from Bismarck.
Are you on the rough tough
That's
streets
pretty
of
lit.
Bismarck?
What?
Are you on the left
streets?
top?
Something like that.
That's what Mr. I forgot his name. Yeah.
Huh?
He's from there.
All right.
He says they did.
You roam the streets of Bismarck.
How do we find the
Oh,
base?
Bismarck.
How do we find the base, Landon?
He was on the socials.
How do we find the base, Landon?
Times it?
Times what?
The height. So like.
And remember how we find the
times
base?
9 is.
Well, that's base times height,
2.
but that's length times height. We have to find the base, we have to take length times width.
8 times
So it'd be 8 times 8, right? It's length times width.
I said that.
16.
You said base times height.
Oh, wait.
So it's length times width times height. Length times width times height. All right, so if the volume of a pyramid is 1/3 of a prism, how would we find the volume of a rectangular pyramid? If the volume is 1/3, how would we figure that out?
1/3 divided by 16.
Not divided by, we'd multiply.
Landon. Landon.
All right, so take everything times 1/3 there to find the volume of a rectangular pyramid. All right, everybody okay with our formulas there? We got them down? All right, so let's try it now. We're gonna find the volume of this pyramid. So how do we find our base?
1/3 times
How do we just find our base?
base times height.
How do we find our base?
Length times width.
Length times width. So this time it's 8 times 8. So our base is going to be
36.
64. 8 times 8 is 64. All right, now to find our volume, we take 64. We take our base times our height, right? So what's our height?
979.
Is 9. All right, so you can use calculators here, but what's 64 times 9?
Oh, like
That would be
64 times 9.
Kira.
576.
576.
I got 566.
That is pretty close. All right, but what do we got to do now to find the volume?
Divided by 1/3.
Multiply by 1/3.
I don't know how.
Is that a 2 or 3?
Where?
What?
This?
Yeah.
1/3. We're multiplying by 1/3. All right, and if we do that, we'll get 192. How do I label this guy?
192. 3 over centimeters.
Centimeters cubed, right? 192 centimeters cubed?
That rhymes.
Yes.
Kind of. All right, so now what's the volume of this guy?
Well, we have no numbers.
Well, we just figured it out.
Oh, well.
The height?
If this has the same base as this pyramid
8.
8 times 8.
64.
and it's the same height, do we have to calculate anything or figure that out?
No.
Nope.
It's the same thing.
It's not the same thing.
You just take it times
But
that.
the pyramid doesn't have a top. It only has a point.
Remember we said the volume of a pyramid is 1/3 the volume of a prism with the same base and the same height?
So your answer times 1/3.
Well, we took this times 1/3 to get our pyramid, so this is just our answer for our prism. Because we took the base times the height to get this.
Okay.
See how that works?
Yeah.
So if we do it again, if we do base times height, it was 8 and this was 9. We'd have 8 times 8 times 9, which is going to give us 576 centimeters cubed.
That's just the same answer.
Yep. And we just said that.
8 times 8 times 9.
Yep. We okay with that?
Yeah.
So the volume of this prism is 3 times the volume of this pyramid.
Is this going to be on our homework?
Yep.
Oh, no.
All right.
Oh, no.
So now on the back we have cones.
Wait, what? We were on the back. Oh, wait, never mind.
It says cones are similar to pyramids because they only have one base. And say the same thing about cones that we said about cylinders. So if we're saying the same thing, it takes how many cones to make up one cylinder? 3. All right. So what's our formula? Does anyone remember for the volume of a cylinder?
Isn't it like pi times?
Well, how do we find volume? It's base times height, right? But now how do we find the base
Base is
of a cone? It's a circle, so we're going to use pi. How do we find the base?
pi times base.
Radius squared.
Pi times radius squared. So take pi times radius squared times the height. All right, so then what would we have to do to find the volume of the cone if it takes 3 cones to fill up one cylinder? What are we missing from here to here to find the volume of a cone? We just said they're the same as a pyramid and a prism. So we just multiply by 1/3 again. Multiply by 1/3. So we take 1/3 times the base times the height. And remember, the base is pi r squared. All right, so how would we find the base of our cone here?
I don't know. I'm not Albert Einstein.
How do we find the base landed?
I don't know.
How do we find the base landed?
Screen.
How do we find the base landed?
Look at the screen.
8 times 2. No, like, take the 2, then with the 2. Like that.
How do we
4.
find the base landed? Just say this.
4 times 8.
No. Pi times the radius squared. So what's our radius?
Oh, 2 inches.
2.
Yep, and then you put with the 2.
So we
Then
take
you make it 4.
3.14 because that's what we're going to use for pi.
What do you get 3.1 for?
That's pi.
Did it freeze?
Yeah, it did.